Hey everyone, and welcome back to the tipping point. Go ahead and grab a drink, get comfy, and settle in, because today we're diving into some stories about secrets, lies, and the absolute chaos that unfolds when the truth finally decides to make an appearance. We've all been there, right? Biting our tongue at a family dinner, dealing with a nightmare boss, or just trying to navigate a relationship that feels like it has a few too many hidden clauses in the contract. Today's stories are all about what happens when someone decides they're done playing by the unspoken rules. We're talking about pranks that unearth decade-old secrets, karma that takes its sweet time but arrives with laser precision, and takedowns so professional they deserve a corner office. It's a full-course meal of vindication, and trust me, you're going to want a front-row seat for all of it. So let's get into it. All right, kicking things off with a story titled The Ghost in the Jeans. The tagline says, "It was supposed to be a joke, but it turned out the joke was on them, and it had been for 30 years. Oh boy, this sounds like a prank that went nuclear, and I am absolutely here for it. Our life, my wife Sarah's and mine, was a sanctuary. That's the only word for it. It wasn't just a place we lived. It was a space we'd consciously built, brick by brick, out of mutual respect and an almost telepathic understanding of each other's needs. Our little apartment, a happy jumble of second-hand furniture, books stacked in every corner, and an absurd number of thriving houseplants, was our fortress against the world. It was a home filled with the comfortable silence of two people who didn't need to talk to feel close, punctuated by late-night debates over whether Blade Runner or Aliens was the superior sci-fi film. It was easy. It was ours. This peaceful existence, however, came with a mandatory recurring tax: visits to Sarah's parents, David and Alina. They weren't just in-laws. They were the self-appointed architects of Sarah's existence, the arbiters of her past, and the perpetually disappointed reviewers of her present, specifically of her choice in a husband: me. Their house was less a home and more a museum dedicated to their own self-importance. It was a sprawling, sterile colonial in a manicured suburb, a place where every object seemed frozen in a state of anxious perfection. The furniture looked like it had never been sat on. The carpets were perpetually vacuumed into those crisp, satisfying lines you see in magazines, and the air itself seemed to hum with a quiet, judgmental tension. To them, I was a walking, talking disruption. A smudge on their otherwise pristine canvas. Their prejudice wasn't the loud, aggressive kind. It was quieter, more insidious. It was a death by 1,000 tiny paper cuts, each one delivered with a polite, almost pitying smile. It was in the way David, a man whose spine seemed to be made of rebar, would clap me on the shoulder a little too hard. "You're a good lad, despite it all," he'd say, his voice booming with false magnanimity. The "it all," of course, was the unholy cocktail of my Mediterranean and Eastern European heritage. It was in the way Alina would glide into a room, her eyes scanning our clothes, our posture, our very beings for flaws. I remember her looking at a framed photograph on our mantelpiece, a picture of my sprawling, boisterous family at a cousin's wedding. She de-tilted her head, a small, tight smile playing on her lips. "How vibrant," she'd murmured, and the word hung in the air like a poorly disguised insult. They were obsessed, truly obsessed, with their own ancestry. They spoke of it as a sacred text, a supposedly unbroken chain of pale, stoic, and vaguely Anglo-Saxon people who had apparently done nothing more interesting for 500 years than pass down their recessive genes. I was the heathen at their altar, the splash of unwanted color in their monochrome world. The first time I walked into that house for dinner, I felt less like a guest and more like a specimen being presented for analysis. David greeted me with a handshake that wasn't a greeting at all. It was an assessment, a quiet sizing up of my physical worth. Alina glided towards me, her smile a carefully constructed mask that never quite reached her cold, pale blue eyes. "Sarah has told us so much about you," she'd cooed, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "She mentioned your family background is quite cosmopolitan." There it was, the first time I heard their special code: cosmopolitan, eclectic, vibrant. Over the years, I learned they were all just polite synonyms for not one of us. Sarah, bless her patient heart, spent the first few years of our relationship acting as a frantic, one-woman UN peacekeeping force. She'd run interference, valiantly trying to bridge the chasm between her love for me and her parents' deeply ingrained snobbery. She defended me in quiet, tense phone calls I wasn't supposed to overhear, constantly trying to force them to see the man she loved instead of the family tree they so vehemently disapproved of. The slights, both big and small, accumulated like dust in their perfect, airless house. I remember one Thanksgiving with painful clarity. The whole extended family was there, a collection of aunts, uncles, and cousins who all seemed to be cast from the same mold. David stood at the head of the long, formal dining table, carving a turkey with a level of self-important ceremony usually reserved for a knighting. He paused, holding the carving knife aloft like a scepter, and smiled at Sarah. "You are the spitting image of your beautiful mother," he announced to the room, his voice filled with pride. That flawless skin, those piercing blue eyes, a true English rose through and through, the table murmured in agreement. He then turned his gaze to me, his smile tightening just a fraction of an inch. "Genetics are a fascinating road map, aren't they, son?" he asked, not really expecting an answer. "It's just so vital to preserve a strong, clean lineage for the generations to come." The implication was a physical blow. I felt the hot flush of indignation creep up my neck. My genes, my history, my family, they were a weak link, a potential corruption. I remember gripping my fork so tightly my knuckles were white, focusing on the swirl of gravy on my mashed potatoes as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. Beneath the tablecloth, Sarah's hand found mine, her fingers lacing through my own in a silent, desperate apology. But it was a phone call that finally broke me, not with a dramatic snap, but with a quiet final crack. It was early December, the air just starting to bite with winter chill. Alina was on the line, ostensibly to coordinate the suffocatingly precise logistics of their Christmas celebration. After 10 minutes of debate about appetizer choices and arrival times, she shifted gears, her voice taking on that dreamy, far-off quality she reserved for her favorite topic, the sacred bloodline. "You know," she said, a sigh of contentment in her voice, "David and I were just saying how we simply cannot wait for grandchildren. It will be such a joy." She paused, and I knew what was coming. "We're so looking forward to seeing those wonderful, dominant, Northern European genes carrying on the family legacy." The silence that followed was cavernous. It was filled with everything she hadn't said, every implication about my lesser DNA being a pollutant, a contaminant that would sully their precious heritage. My potential children were already a disappointment to her before they even existed. When I hung up the phone, the familiar hot anger was gone. In its place was a chilling, quiet calm. I just sat there in my office chair, the echo of her words ringing in my ears, the family legacy. And in that cold, quiet moment, a brilliantly petty idea began to germinate. A slow, wicked grin spread across my face. Their obsession, their beautiful, ridiculous, hateful obsession was going to be their undoing, or, at the very least, it was going to be their Christmas gift. I spun around in my chair, the wheels squeaking on the hardwood floor. I pulled up my web browser, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a newfound sense of purpose. I typed in the names of the two most popular consumer DNA testing companies, comparing their features with the focus of a general planning and invasion. This was it. This was perfect. It was a jab so subtle, so cloaked in the language of their own obsession, that they couldn't possibly complain about it without revealing the full, ugly depth of their bigotry. My plan wasn't even that ambitious. I didn't fantasize about unearthing some dramatic, dynasty-destroying secret. My goal was much smaller, much pettier. I just wanted to watch their faces as they processed a result that showed they were 5% Iberian, or 3% Ashkenazi Jewish, or even 1% broadly West Asian. I wanted to give them the gift of inconvenient data, a tiny, undeniable crack in the flawless porcelain facade of their genetic purity. I wanted to watch them have to reconcile their entire worldview with a pie chart. I imagined Alina's tight smile, the forced gratitude as she realized her Christmas gift was a gentle mockery of her most deeply held belief. I added 2 kits to my cart, typed in their shipping address, and clicked Complete Purchase. Leaning back in my chair, I felt a sense of giddy, triumphant satisfaction that was more intoxicating than any holiday spirit. Christmas Eve at David and Alina's was, as always, a masterclass in stilted pleasantries. The house smelled aggressively of pine potpourri and simmering resentment. We moved through the evening like actors in a long-running, poorly reviewed play, hitting our marks and reciting our lines with practiced cheer. We made excruciatingly dull small talk with relatives who looked right through me. We drank sherry that was cloyingly sweet, and we exchanged gifts with a theatrical enthusiasm that felt utterly exhausting. I bided my time, letting the pile of discarded wrapping paper grow into a small mountain in the center of the living room. Finally, when the gift-giving frenzy had died down to a polite lull, I made my move. I retrieved the 2 identically wrapped, rectangular boxes from under the tree. With the calm deliberation of a bomb disposal expert, I handed one to David and one to Alina. "This is a joint gift for both of you," I said, my voice a marvel of casual warmth. I felt Sarah's eyes on me, a current of shared amusement passing between us. David, ever suspicious, peeled back the wrapping paper with the caution of a man expecting a spring-loaded snake to pop out. He held the box, turning it over in his hands. "Ancestry, DNA," he read aloud, his voice flat and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the tone he used when encountering something he deemed both modern and foolish. Alina unwrapped hers more delicately, her brow furrowed in a mask of polite confusion. "Oh," was all she managed, placing the box on her lap as if it were contaminated. "How novel." This was my moment to shine. I leaned forward, channeling my inner game show host. "Well, I know how passionate you both are about your heritage and family history," I began, my performance worthy of at least a regional theater award. "I thought it would be a fun, scientific way to explore it even further. Imagine seeing the precise breakdown of your roots, a map of your history going back centuries. You could finally confirm all those family stories." Sarah, my wonderful, perceptive, and occasionally mischievous wife, caught on immediately. She saw the glint in my eye, the carefully suppressed smirk at the corner of my mouth, and instead of stopping me, she jumped in with both feet, selling my petty scheme better than I ever could have. "Dad, Mom, that's such a cool idea," she exclaimed, her enthusiasm sounding completely genuine. "You have to do it. We can compare your results to mine when I do one. It'll be a family project." They were cornered, trapped. To refuse the gift now, after my heartfelt speech and their own daughter's enthusiastic endorsement, would be impossibly rude. It would expose their obsession as something ugly, not the noble pursuit of history they pretended it was. And so, they did what they always did when faced with an unpleasant social obligation. They acquiesced with the tight smiles and stiff nods of people who had just been handed a live grenade and told it was a snow globe. "Yes, well, thank you," David mumbled, placing the kit on a nearby end table with a quiet thud. "Very thoughtful." The kits were then summarily ignored for the rest of the evening, banished to the periphery, but it didn't matter. I had planted the seed. The fuse had been lit. I knew my work was done. The weeks after Christmas crawled by. January bled into a dreary, gray February. Life returned to the warm, comfortable rhythm of our sanctuary. We worked, we cooked, we watched our bad sci-fi movies. The memory of my Christmas prank faded, becoming a private joke that would occasionally surface, making me chuckle to myself at my desk or share a knowing look with Sarah over dinner. We'd wonder aloud if they'd even bothered to spit in the tubes. Then came the phone call that ripped our world off its axis. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was at work, staring so deep into a spreadsheet that the numbers were starting to blur together. My phone vibrated against the polished surface of my desk. I glanced at the screen. "Sarah." I smiled, picking it up, ready with a cheerful, "Hey, you." The sound that came through the receiver was not my wife's voice. It was a strangled, guttural sob. a sound of such pure, gut-wrenching shock that it felt like an electric jolt to my own nervous system. It was a sound I had never, ever heard from her. "Sarah, what is it? What's wrong?" I asked, my own heart beginning to pound against my ribs. "You have to come home," she managed to choke out between gasps. "Just, please come home now." "I'm on my way," I said, already grabbing my keys and coat, my mind racing through a Rolodex of horrors. A car accident, a death in the family, a fire. The 20-minute drive from my office to our apartment was the longest, most agonizing journey of my life. Every red light was a personal torment, every slow driver a villain. I ran through the lobby and took the stairs 2 at a time, my lungs burning. I burst through our front door to find a scene of unnerving stillness. Sarah was sitting on the living room floor, cross-legged, her laptop open in front of her. She wasn't crying anymore. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide, red-rimmed, and staring at the screen with a horrifying emptiness. She looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and shattered. She didn't look up as I rushed to her side. She just lifted a trembling, unsteady hand and pointed at the screen. "Look," she whispered, her voice a reedy, broken thing. It was an email forward from Alina. The subject line was chillingly simple: "Our results." My heart hammered in my chest as I knelt beside her. My first thought was a flash of dark humor. Oh God, they're 50% Italian. She's lost her mind. I scanned the screen. It was Alina's ancestry profile, a brightly colored pie chart breaking down her genetic makeup. 55% British and Irish, 30% Scandinavian, 15% Western European. It was exactly as boring and predictable as she'd always claimed. My prank was a dud, a total failure. I felt a bizarre pang of disappointment. But then my eyes scrolled down, drawn by Sarah's fixed gaze. I saw a section I'd never even considered, a feature that hadn't been part of my petty little calculus: DNA relatives. And there, listed under the stark heading of close family, right next to a little green dot and the words predicted, father, was a man's name. A name that was not David. My stomach plummeted into my shoes. The air in the room became thick and heavy, impossible to breathe. No, this couldn't be right. It had to be a mistake, a glitch in the system. Sarah, her hand shaking so badly she could barely control the cursor, clicked over to another open tab. It was her own ancestry profile. The email with her results had arrived just moments before her mother's. She scrolled down, past her own predictable pie chart, down to the section that mapped her parentage. On her mother's side, there was Alina's name, linked and confirmed. But on her father's side, where David's name and picture should have been, there was only a gray, anonymous silhouette and a hyperlink to the profile of that same unknown man from Alina's results. The room tilted. The mismatched furniture, the thriving plants, our entire sanctuary seemed to spin around me. 35 years. For 35 years, David had raised a daughter that was not his. For 35 years, Alina, the self-appointed guardian of genetic purity, the high priestess of the unbroken bloodline, had been harboring a secret of monumental hypocrisy. And Sarah, my Sarah, the English rose, the living, breathing proof of their perfect, clean lineage, was the product of that secret. My little joke, my petty, insignificant poke at their snobbery, had not just cracked their facade. It had taken a sledgehammer to the very foundation of their lives. The fallout was apocalyptic. That's the only word for it. The first conversation between David and Alina, which Sarah later described to me in broken pieces, was a quiet, horrifying event. There was no shouting, no screaming, just a single, devastating question from David, followed by a silence that stretched for an eternity before Alina's quiet, tearful confession. It ended with David, a man whose entire identity was meticulously constructed around his name, his history, his bloodline, packing a single suitcase and walking out of the sterile, perfect house he had built. He didn't slam the door. He just deflated like a balloon pricked with a pin. All the pride, all the bluster, gone in an instant. Eleanor, her fortress of genetic superiority having been leveled by a direct hit, became a ghost in her own home. The swift, brutal divorce was a quiet demolition of a life that was, it turned out, built on a foundation of lies. And Sarah, my wife, was broken. Her entire life, her sense of self, her memories, they had all been rewritten in an instant. There was no satisfaction for me, no sweet taste of revenge. The smug triumph I felt when I ordered those kits had curdled into a permanent, sickening guilt. I had wanted to throw a pebble to ripple their calm, perfect water. Instead, I had triggered a landslide that buried everyone I cared about, including my own wife. We are still together. Sarah and I were sifting through the rubble of her family history, trying to build something new on the fractured, unstable ground. My prank worked better than I ever could have possibly imagined, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. Some truths are buried for a reason, and you should be very, very careful what you go digging for. Wow, just wow. That is a textbook case of be careful what you wish for because you might just get it, along with a catastrophic amount of collateral damage. You can't even be mad at the guy. His in-laws were peddling some seriously ugly, thinly veiled bigotry, and his prank was, on paper, perfectly tailored to their specific brand of awful. It was poetic, but the universe doesn't always grade on a curve. What started as a petty, well-deserved jab accidentally uncovered a truth so monumental it vaporized an entire family. There's no victory here. There's no sweet revenge. The satisfaction of seeing Eleanor's hypocrisy exposed is completely overshadowed by the absolute devastation it caused Sarah. It's a brutal reminder that sometimes, when you go digging in someone else's backyard, you don't just find a few embarrassing secrets. You find a bomb. And there's no putting that pin back in. Okay, up next we have a story titled Karma Served Cold. The quote is, "She wanted me to get an abortion to protect her son's future, and years later she got her wish, just with the wrong woman at the wrong time for the very wrong reasons." Oh, the universe loves irony, doesn't it? This sounds like a story about a debt coming due, and I have a feeling the interest rate was steep. Leo was like one of those breathtakingly beautiful architect-designed houses you see in magazines, all clean lines, soaring windows, and undeniable charm. From the outside, he was everything you might think you wanted. He was witty, he was effortlessly attentive, and he was so handsome it seemed almost unfair to the rest of the world. But if you looked closely, you'd realize the whole stunning structure was built on sand. It had no foundation. And the slightest pressure, especially a breeze blowing from the direction of his mother, Margaret, would make the entire facade tremble. Margaret wasn't just a doting mother. She was the obsessive architect, general contractor, and lifelong project manager of her son's life. She viewed him not as a grown man making his own way in the world, but as her magnum opus, a personal project to be meticulously managed, polished, and presented for admiration. He was her greatest achievement, and by extension, her most valuable asset. Our relationship, therefore, often felt less like a romance between two people and more like a quiet, two-front war against her influence. Every decision was subject to a silent, invisible audit. Where we went for a weekend trip. Oh, that little town. Does it have the kind of networking opportunities Leo needs? What brand of coffee we bought? Are you sure that's the most cost-effective choice for your shared budget? Even the friends I had, she seems nice, but is her career path ambitious enough to inspire you both? It was exhausting. It felt like my entire existence was being weighed and measured against its utility to the Leo project. My official introduction to Margaret was disguised as a casual Sunday brunch at a chic, overpriced bistro. In reality, it was the most intense job interview of my life. Over lukewarm eggs, Benedict, and bottomless mimosas that failed to numb my anxiety, she conducted a polite but ruthlessly efficient interrogation, all while maintaining a smile as bright and hard as a diamond. "So what's your 5-year plan, dear?" she asked, her perfectly manicured fingers stirring her tea. It wasn't a question, it was an entrance exam. "What are your thoughts on balancing a career and family? Are you a natural saver, or do you tend to be more frivolous?" Each question was a carefully calibrated probe, designed to determine if I was a suitable accessory for the life she had so painstakingly designed for her son. I felt like a car she was thinking of leasing, checking the specs, kicking the tires, wondering if the depreciation would be acceptable. And Leo, my charming, beautiful Leo, just smiled and happily devoured a stack of blueberry pancakes, completely oblivious to the fact that I was being vetted like a prize mare at an auction. He'd laugh at her little jokes and agree with her observations, seeing her not as a master manipulator, but just a loving, interested mom. I walked away from that brunch with a strange chill clinging to me, the unnerving feeling that I wasn't dating a man. I was auditioning for a supporting role in the grand production of his life, a production written, directed, and produced by his mother. A few months later, the hypothetical questions from that brunch became terrifyingly, sickeningly real. A late period, a rising tide of anxiety, and two faint pink lines on a stick in the bathroom. It was a private, terrifying moment. I sat on the edge of the tub, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and called Leo. I confided in him my fears, my uncertainty. It was a moment of supreme vulnerability, a whispered worry meant to be shared between two partners who were supposed to be a team. Or so I believed. I should have known better. I should have known that any information given to Leo was immediately uploaded to the central server, Margaret. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. "Is this Amelia?" a crisp voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" "It's Margaret, dear, Leo's mother." Her voice, usually so full of syrupy, manufactured warmth, was now stripped bare. All that remained was the cold, sharp edge of pragmatism. "Leo tells me there might be a situation," she stated, dispensing with any preamble. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't ask if I was scared or what I wanted. She didn't even ask if the test was confirmed. She immediately launched into a clinical, dispassionate monologue about how a child, at this specific moment, would be logistically catastrophic for Leo's nascent career. She talked about how it would upset the delicate balance of his 5-year plan, a plan she spoke of as if it were a sacred document. She spoke of my body and our potential, unconfirmed child, as if they were an unforeseen expense on a quarterly report, a sudden market downturn that needed to be mitigated. It was the most dehumanizing conversation of my life. The pregnancy scare, mercifully, turned out to be a false alarm. A visit to the doctor confirmed it. The wave of relief I felt was so profound, so all-encompassing, it nearly brought me to my knees in the clinic's parking lot. But the incident had planted a seed of pure dread in my heart. The joy of the not pregnant news was completely tainted by the horror of Margaret's reaction. And Margaret, it seemed, was determined to water that seed of dread until it bloomed into something monstrous. A week later, just as the knot of anxiety in my stomach had begun to loosen, Margaret summoned me for coffee. "Just the two of us, dear," she'd said on the phone. "A little chat." The invitation felt less like a friendly gesture and more like a subpoena. We met at a quiet corner table in a sterile, minimalist cafe that smelled of burnt espresso and her expensive, cloying perfume. She laid her cards on the table with the precision of a surgeon laying out her tools. "I'm so relieved everything turned out to be a simple misunderstanding," she began, stirring her cappuccino with an unnerving, rhythmic stillness, her eyes fixed on the vortex in her cup. "But it's made me realize we need to be clear, for everyone's sake." She looked up, and her gaze, devoid of any warmth, locked onto mine. "Leo is destined for remarkable things, Amelia. He has a trajectory. A family is in the plan, of course," she said, as if granting a generous concession. "But not for at least another decade. It must be timed perfectly to coincide with the peak of his career." I just sat there, my hands wrapped around my cooling mug, my throat too tight to speak. "If you were ever to find yourself in that position again," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I trust you would make the sensible choice, The smart choice for everyone involved. She leaned forward slightly, the scent of her perfume intensifying. An early complication, she finished, her voice now barely audible, is so much easier to manage than a permanent one. There it was, the explicit, undisguised demand. She was coaching me on how to handle a future abortion for a hypothetical child, framing it as a savvy career move for her son. The audacity of it, the sheer, cold-blooded pragmatism was breathtaking. And where was Leo in all of this? After her first frantic phone call, I had tearfully told him how violated and terrified it made me feel. He'd held me, promised to talk to her, promised to finally set some boundaries. He de-promised to protect me. Yet here I was, being counseled by his mother on the logistical benefits of terminating a pregnancy, and my partner, my supposed protector, was completely, utterly silent. He hadn't just failed to build a fence, he had held the gate open for her. In the antiseptic quiet of that coffee shop, my love for Leo didn't just die, it was euthanized. It wasn't a passionate, dramatic heartbreak with screaming and slammed doors. It was a cold, clear-eyed, silent realization. I looked at Margaret's perfectly composed face and saw my entire future with her son stretch out before me. A lifetime of being managed, minimized, and condescended to by this woman. A lifetime with a husband who would offer placating smiles and empty promises, but would never, not once, actually stand up for me or our life together. My life would not be my own. It would be a footnote in Margaret's meticulously crafted narrative of her son's success. I would be forever secondary. A strange calm washed over me. I reached into my purse, pulled out a $10 bill and placed it gently on the table, enough for both our coffees. I looked Margaret directly in the eye, and for the first time I didn't feel intimidated. I felt nothing at all. I stood up, turned, and walked out without another word. When Leo came home that evening, humming a cheerful tune, he found me packing a bag. He was confused, then panicked. He didn't understand. What happened? Did my mom say something to you? I'll talk to her again, I promise. I didn't fight. I didn't cry. I simply stopped what I was doing, looked at him, and said, with a calmness that seemed to frighten even me, I deserve a partner, Leo, not a puppet. And then I walked out of his beautiful, empty house and out of his life for good. My revenge wasn't a plot or a scheme. I didn't key his car or post angry diatribes online. My revenge was a quiet, solemn promise I made to myself in the lonely, silent weeks that followed. I would build a life so beautiful, so full, and so authentically mine that the memory of Leo and Margaret would shrink until it was nothing more than a speck in my rearview mirror. And I kept that promise. I poured all the energy I had wasted trying to manage Margaret's influence into my own life. I threw myself into my career, earning promotions I had once been subtly discouraged from pursuing. I started traveling not to network, but to see the world. I learned to cook extravagant, messy meals in my own kitchen. I made friends who filled my life with raucous, uncomplicated laughter. And then I met Michael. He was everything Leo wasn't: solid, dependable, and fiercely loyal. He was a house built of brick and stone with a foundation that went deep into the earth. When I told him the story of Leo and Margaret, his reaction wasn't to placate or make excuses. His jaw tightened and he said, I am so sorry anyone ever made you feel that way. His mother, a warm, funny woman who loved to garden, welcomed me into their family with an immediate, unreserved hug. When Michael and I decided to have a child years later, it was our decision, born of love and partnership on our timeline. My life became a vibrant, joyful tapestry that I had woven myself with my own hands in my own time. I was happy, truly, deeply happy. Years passed. The memories of Leo and Margaret had faded to muted, gray photographs in a dusty corner of my mind. One sunny afternoon, I was sitting on a blanket in a sun-drenched park, watching my 2-year-old daughter, Lily, trying to make friends with a particularly brave squirrel. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from an old mutual friend from my life with Leo, someone I hadn't spoken to in ages. The text was a screenshot of a vaguely sad, cryptic Facebook post from a woman I dimly recognized as Leo's wife. It was something about difficult choices and things not going according to plan. Underneath the screenshot, my friend had written a simple, tantalizing caption: "You are not going to believe the story behind this." My curiosity, long dormant, piqued. I called her. "Okay, spill," I said, trying to keep my voice casual as Lily shrieked with delight at the squirrel. "You're not going to believe this," my friend said, her voice giddy with the thrill of cosmic gossip. "It's the most perfectly ironic thing I've ever heard." And the story she told me was a masterpiece, a symphony of cosmic justice, so perfect it felt like the punchline to a joke the universe had been setting up for nearly a decade. Leo, my friend explained, had predictably married a woman who was the human equivalent of a beige cashmere sweater, elegant, expensive, and utterly devoid of personality. She was perfect. Margaret approved. For years, Margaret's laser-like focus had shifted from launching her son's career to acquiring her next, most important accessory, a grandchild. It became her new, all-consuming obsession. According to my friend, it was all she talked about. She had decorated a nursery in her own home, a palace of muted grays and antique white that was waiting, pristine and untouched, for its royal occupant. She bought mountains of designer baby clothes, tiny shoes, and handcrafted wooden toys. She drove everyone around her insane with her constant talk of bloodlines and legacy, now eagerly anticipated instead of jealously guarded. She wanted her grandchild. She needed her grandchild. It was the final piece of the Leo project. And then finally it happened. Leo's wife got pregnant. Margaret was, by all accounts, deliriously, ecstatically happy. She cried. She threw a lavish party. She started planning the baby's entire life, from preschool to university. The universe was finally delivering her her due. But then, in a twist of logic so insane, so breathtakingly selfish it was almost brilliant, Margaret looked at a calendar. The baby's due date was in early March. This presented a problem, a major problem, because Margaret, you see, had booked a 2-month-long, non-refundable, ultra-luxury cruise through the Mediterranean for April and May. It was the trip of a lifetime. She had boasted about it for months. And suddenly, the timing of her long-awaited grandchild was inconvenient. The optics of a newborn just wouldn't work with her travel plans. She couldn't be jetting off to Santorini if she was supposed to be a doting new grandmother. It would be messy. So Margaret did what Margaret does. She took matters into her own hands. She sat down with her pliant, gentle daughter-in-law for a little chat. And my friend said, quoting a mutual acquaintance who had heard the story from the daughter-in-law herself, Margaret gave her the exact same speech she had given me in that sterile coffee shop all those years ago. She spoke of sensible choices. She talked about perfect timing. She reasoned that a small delay now would be better for everyone in the long run. She convinced this young woman that putting the pregnancy on hold was the most logical, practical solution to this tricky scheduling conflict. And Leo's wife, as spineless as her husband, listened. She did what she was told. She had an abortion. She terminated her pregnancy so her mother-in-law wouldn't have to reschedule a vacation. I was silent on my end of the line, watching my daughter chase a butterfly across the grass. Margaret, the woman whose entire being had become fixated on the acquisition of a grandchild, had personally, willfully orchestrated its destruction. She had finally gotten her wish, an abortion performed for the sake of convenience, and in doing so had annihilated her own deepest desire. She had coached the wrong woman at the wrong time for the very, very wrong reasons. Listening to the story, I didn't feel a spike of vengeful glee. I didn't laugh. I just felt a quiet, profound sense of balance. It was the feeling of watching a wave you'd seen go out finally, inevitably, roll back in. A debt had been settled, not by me, but by the universe itself. The books were balanced. A perfect, closed circle of karma. When you spend your life trying to control everyone else's story, don't be surprised when you write yourself a tragic ending. Okay, can we just take a moment to appreciate the sheer, breathtaking poetry of that? That's not just karma. That's karma as written by a Greek tragedian. It's magnificent. This woman, Margaret, built her entire identity around controlling her son's life, and her one and only tool was manipulation. She used that tool on our narrator to try and prevent a family, and then used that exact same tool years later and accidentally prevented the one thing she wanted most in the world. She played herself. It's the most beautiful, ironic, self-inflicted wound I have ever heard of. And the best part for our narrator, she didn't have to do a single thing. She just had to walk away, build a happy life, and let Margaret's own toxicity do the rest. That's not just revenge, that's cosmic justice. The universe saw the receipt and said, "No, no, you pay this one." This next story is titled The Grandson Who Purred, and the tagline is, "My mother-in-law hated my cats so much, I decided to introduce them properly, just not in the way she expected." I have a feeling this is going to be a masterclass in next-level petty revenge, and as a fan of both cats and elaborate schemes, I am so ready for this. Dramatized narrative. First, you need to understand about Egon. To call him just a cat would be a gross injustice, like calling the Grand Canyon just a hole. Egon was a four-legged, ginger-furred agent of chaos and cuddles. He was a domestic tyrant with a purr like a tiny, rumbling motorboat and an uncanny ability to know the precise moment to hop onto a laptop keyboard. He was a gourmand with a deep appreciation for forbidden butter, a shadow that followed me from room to room, and a constant, warm presence in my life. He was, in short, my best friend. To my mother-in-law, Carol, however, he was a menace. Public enemy number one. Carol was a woman who worshipped at the altar of pristine surfaces and beige upholstery. Her home wasn't just clean, it was surgically sterile, a museum of untouched ornaments and spotless carpets where dust was afraid to settle. She viewed my beloved Egon as a vulgar, hair-shedding, claw-sharpening vandal sent from the underworld with the express purpose of destroying her sanitized world. Her disdain wasn't a secret. It was a running joke in the family, but every jab, every sigh, every passive-aggressive comment felt deeply personal. Whenever we'd visit her, she'd follow me around with a lint roller as if I were personally carrying a cloud of dander. And whenever she'd brave a visit to our house, a rare and fraught occasion, she'd survey our comfortable, lived-in space with the grim expression of a health inspector entering a condemned restaurant. "Oh," she'd say, eyeing a throw pillow Egon had recently napped on, "you can just see the allergens." The first real shot across the bow in our Cold War was the Christmas sweater incident. I had spent weeks and a small fortune knitting Carol a sweater. It was a beautiful and ridiculously expensive charcoal gray cashmere garment. It was soft, elegant, and timeless. I was genuinely proud of it. It was a real olive branch. And she loved it, or at least, she put on a convincing performance of loving it, holding it up to her cheek and cooing about the quality. The next time she visited our house, she wore it. A tactical move, I later realized. Egon, who considers any unoccupied lap a personal, engraved invitation, did what he always does. He hopped up for a snooze. Before his paws even settled into the cashmere, Carol let out a shriek as if she'd been stabbed with a hot poker. Get it off," she yelped, flinging my poor, confused cat onto the floor. She then spent the next hour bemoaning how the sweater, her beautiful, thoughtful gift, was now utterly and completely ruined. I examined it later, holding it up to the light like a detective examining evidence. There wasn't a single visible hair on it, not one, but it didn't matter. The sweater was never seen again. Banished to whatever closet dimension she sent things that had been contaminated by joy, or in this case, cat fur. After that, Carol suddenly and mysteriously developed a debilitating cat allergy. It was a medical marvel, this allergy. It was so specific that it only seemed to flare up within the exact geographic boundaries of our property. Magically, she could no longer visit us. All family gatherings from that point forward had to be at her sterile home or a neutral, cat-free location. "Oh, I would just love to see what you've done with the garden," she'd sigh into the phone, her voice dripping with faux regret. But you know, with him there, my throat just closes up. It's simply too dangerous. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression, a tactical masterstroke that effectively made me and my husband second-class citizens in our own family, forcing us to constantly accommodate her, all because of my cat. The final straw, the comment that launched 1,000 fake profile clicks, came during one of her mandated Sunday family dinners at her house. Her other children lived out of state, a fact she had begun to weaponize with increasing frequency. During a lull in the conversation, she placed her fork down with a dramatic sigh and stared into the middle distance, as if addressing an unseen audience. "It's just so hard being alone sometimes," she lamented, her voice trembling slightly. "If only I had a grandchild to talk to, someone charming and witty and intelligent, someone who truly understands me." She paused for maximum dramatic effect, then gestured vaguely in the direction of my husband and me. Not like, "Well, you know." The implication was as subtle as a sledgehammer to the face. My cat, my beautiful, clever, loving Egon, was a pathetic, low-rent substitute for the grand family she felt she was entitled to. My choice to have a pet instead of immediately producing an heir was a personal insult to her. That night I was stewing. I sat on the couch, scrolling aimlessly through social media, my thumb flicking past smiling families and happy announcements, Carol's words echoing in my head. Someone charming and witty and intelligent. Then a picture of Egon popped up in my phone's memories. He was perched on a bookshelf, looking down at the camera with an expression of regal indifference, one ginger paw tucked neatly under his chest. He looked so dignified, so intelligent. And in that moment, an idea of such pure, diabolical, hilarious pettiness blossomed in my mind that I actually laughed out loud. Carol wanted a charming, intelligent man to confide in. Fine, I would give her one. I grabbed my laptop, the screen illuminating my face with a devilish glow. I opened a new browser tab and began to build him from scratch. The name came to me first, William Will Thorne. It sounded sturdy, respectable, and just a little bit romantic. Next, the profile picture. I spent a good 20 minutes scouring stock photo websites for the perfect face. Not too handsome, that would be suspicious. He needed to be distinguished. Finally, I found him. A man in his late 60s, with kind, crinkling eyes, a neatly trimmed salt-and-pepper beard, and a thoughtful expression, wearing a tweed jacket. He looked like he spent his weekends reading philosophy and listening to Vivaldi. He was perfect. The biography was a work of art, a bespoke trap tailored specifically for Carol. Semi-retired architect, I typed. Widower. A crucial touch for sympathy points. Voracious reader. Lover of classical music, single malt scotch, and intelligent conversation. It was every lonely, upper-middle-class woman's fantasy. And the photos. The photos were my masterstroke, the element that elevated this from a simple prank to a piece of performance art. They were all Egon, but in disguise. I spent the next hour curating a gallery of abstract, sophisticated images. An artfully cropped shot of his ginger paw resting on the cover of a Dostoevsky novel became enjoying a quiet afternoon with an old friend. A picture of his elegant, furry silhouette against a window during a dramatic sunset was captioned, contemplating the view from my study. I poured a small amount of apple juice into a crystal whiskey tumbler and snapped a photo of the tip of Egon's tail swishing past it. A wee dram to end the day. The profile was a masterpiece of feline espionage. The game was afoot. With a trembling finger, I navigated to Carol's page and clicked Add Friend from Will Thorne's account. I leaned back, my heart thumping with giddy anticipation. To my absolute delight, she accepted the request within the hour. Carol, likely flattered by the attention from such a distinguished-looking gentleman who listed Vivaldi and Debussy as interests, had taken the bait. And so my campaign of charm began. As Will, I was the epitome of a thoughtful, attentive gentleman. I was everything her own family in her eyes was not. I left insightful comments on her gardening posts. That's a magnificent rose bush, Carol, a testament to your patience and care. I sent her links to articles about her favorite Impressionist painters. I messaged her to ask thoughtful questions about her day, listening with seemingly endless empathy as she recounted petty squabbles at her bridge club. I was the perfect man, and she was completely and utterly hooked. Soon, she was talking about her new online friend to anyone who would listen. The dramatic irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Oh, you simply wouldn't believe it," she'd gush to my husband and me over the phone, her voice animated in a way we hadn't heard in years. "I've met the most wonderful man online. His name is Will. He's so cultured, so sensitive. We talked for an hour last night about the new exhibit at the museum." My husband would just look at me, his face a mask of utter bewilderment, while I desperately tried to stifle my laughter, turning it into a cough. Egon, the real Will Thorne, would be purring contentedly on my lap as I typed a reply as Will on my phone under the table. "Carol, your insights are always so fascinating." The relationship deepened. As she grew more comfortable, Carol began to confide in Will, pouring her heart out in long, rambling private messages that were a goldmine of unfiltered grievances. She told him about her profound loneliness, her frustrations with her ungrateful children, and yes, her profound, unending irritation with her daughter-in-law's insufferable, hair-shedding, allergy-inducing cat. As Will, I was the perfect confidant. I was always sympathetic, always understanding, always on her side. "It sounds to me, Carol, like you are a deeply sensitive woman who is simply unappreciated by those around you," I'd type, occasionally pausing to scratch Egon, the source of all her misery, right behind his ears. He'd purr louder, blissfully unaware of his role as a digital Cyrano de Bergerac. I was her therapist, her confidant, her budding romance, and it was all being channeled through the very creature she despised. The pettiness of it was exquisite. The perfect moment for the grand reveal presented itself on a silver platter, Carol's 70th birthday dinner. The whole extended family was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all gathered at a fancy restaurant. Carol was radiant, holding court at the head of the table, talking non-stop about her mysterious online admirer, who had, of course, sent a lovely e-card that morning. "I feel like he's part of the family already," she declared, beaming at the assembled crowd. "He just gets me in a way no one else does. I simply cannot wait for you all to meet him." That was my cue. I dabbed my lips delicately with my napkin and gave her my sweetest, most innocent smile. "Oh, Carol, I think you can introduce us right now," I said. A hush fell over the table. All eyes turned to me. Carol looked confused. I pulled out my phone, my hand steady, my heart singing with the thrill of victory. I navigated to the Will Thorne profile page and held it up for her to see the handsome, silver-haired profile picture she knew so well. "This is him, right?" I asked. She nodded eagerly, a proud smile on her face. "Yes, that's my Will." Then with a dramatic flick of my thumb, I swiped. The next photo appeared on the screen, a close-up of a ginger paw resting on a chess piece. Carol's smile faltered. I swiped again. A photo of Will's favorite reading chair, which was, of course, Egon's napping throne with Egon curled up in it. I kept swiping. The arty shots of a cat's tail, a cat's silhouette, a cat's whiskers against a book. The color drained from Carol's face as her brain struggled to connect the impossible dots. Her expression shifted from radiant joy to utter confusion, then to dawning, abject horror. I delivered the final, devastating blow. "Carol," I said, my voice dripping with theatrical sincerity as I gestured to my husband. "Darling, would you bring him in?" On cue, as if he'd been rehearsing for this moment his whole life, my husband, who I had finally let in on the full scope of the prank that morning, came walking back from the car carrying a pet carrier. He opened the door, reached in, and held up my beautiful ginger cat, Lion King style. Egon, ever the gentleman, blinked in the restaurant lights and let out a polite little meow. "Carol," I announced to the silent, stunned table, "meet William Thorne, or, as he's known around our house, Egon." The silence in the room was absolute. so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife. Then my brother-in-law, who had endured years of his mother's complaints, snorted. A strangled giggle escaped my sister-in-law. Within seconds, the entire table, save for a statue still, utterly mortified Carol and a very bewildered Egon, was howling with uncontrollable laughter. Tears were streaming down their faces. Carol was humiliated, trapped in a checkmate of her own making. She couldn't even get angry without having to admit to the entire family that she'd spent 3 months pouring her heart out, sharing her deepest secrets, and developing a romantic attachment to a creature she claimed to despise. The power dynamic in our relationship had shifted, permanently and seismically. The drive home was quiet, but a few weeks later, when she visited at our house for the first time in over a year, something had changed. I walked into the living room to see her tentatively, almost shyly, stroking Egon's back as he lay on the sofa. He, of course, was purring like a motorboat. She never said another bad word about him again. If you can't appreciate the family you have, you might just find love in the most unexpected of disguises. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for what might be the most diabolical, long-term, and perfectly executed petty revenge I have ever heard in my life. This wasn't just a prank. This was a psychological masterpiece. She didn't just get revenge on her mother-in-law. She became her mother-in-law's trusted confidant and emotional support system via cat proxy. She found the woman's deepest emotional need, to be understood by a sensitive, intelligent man, and filled it with the very thing she hated most in the world. The genius of it is that Carol couldn't even be mad. How do you rage at someone for tricking you into loving them, even if the them is a cat? She was so thoroughly outplayed, she had no choice but to surrender. That's not just checkmate. That's flipping the whole chessboard over and changing the rules of the game. Absolutely legendary. All right, this next one is called "The Devil Wears a Bad Disguise." The quote reads, "He told me he was working late, and he was. He was just working on destroying our lives, and I decided to handle his severance package personally." That title, that quote. This feels less like petty revenge and more like a full-scale corporate takedown. This is the story you read when you need to feel a sense of righteous fury. Let's do it. On the surface, our life was a picture-perfect postcard from the American dream. My husband Mark and I were that couple, the one everyone pointed to as evidence that you really could have it all. We were young, we were ambitious, we were a team. We had a pact forged over cheap takeout and big dreams in our first tiny apartment. I would work my steady, reliable job in marketing, the one with the good benefits and the predictable salary. My income would be the bedrock, covering our bills, building our savings, and giving him the freedom to swing for the fences. And he was swinging. He'd poured every ounce of his energy into his high-stakes career at a boutique finance firm, a place where the pressure was immense, but the rewards were supposedly life-changing. He'd recently gotten a major promotion, becoming the right-hand man, the trusted protege, to a formidable senior partner, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her 40s named Alina. I was so proud of him. I bragged about his success to my friends. I celebrated his wins as if they were my own, because they were our wins. But then the little changes began. They were like hairline fractures in a beautiful vase, almost invisible at first, but threatening to shatter the whole thing. He grew distant, a million miles away even when he was sitting right next to me on the couch. His phone, which used to be communal property, became a fortress. He was perpetually attached to it, angling the screen away from me, his fingers flying in frantic, whispered texts. It was now guarded like a state secret. The late nights at the office, once a symbol of his admirable drive, started to feel different. They were no longer tinged with the exhaustion of hard work, but with a furtive, nervous energy. It was a frantic stress that had nothing to do with ambition and everything to do with hiding something. The air in our home grew heavy with unspoken words. His first mistake was a gift. It was a Tuesday night, and he came home late, smelling of an expensive, musky cologne I didn't recognize. He strode in with a forced, salesman smile and handed me a glossy black box from a high-end designer whose name I only knew from magazines. Inside was a ridiculously expensive leather handbag. It was a beautiful bag objectively, but it was completely out of character and wildly outside the careful budget we lived on. "It was a surprise bonus," he said, a little too quickly, avoiding my eyes as he loosened his tie. "Eleanor is just incredibly generous with her top performers. She says I'm killing it." "A bonus? Mark, this bag costs more than our mortgage payment," I said, the leather feeling cold and wrong in my hands. A knot of unease began to twist in my stomach. He got defensive immediately. "Can't you just say thank you? I do something nice for you and you immediately start auditing me. I'm working my tail off for us." The bag felt heavy with a guilt I didn't yet understand. A week later, I was mindlessly scrolling through social media when I saw a picture of Eleanor. A friend had tagged her in a post from a charity gala that had happened a few weeks prior. She was smiling at the camera, a glass of champagne in her hand. And there, hanging from her arm, was the exact same unmistakable, very expensive handbag. The knot in my stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. It wasn't a bonus. It was a re-gift. The second crack in our foundation appeared a month later. Mark announced he had to go on a last-minute, all-expenses-paid work trip for the weekend. "Eleanor and I have to fly out to Napa and close a massive deal with a vineyard owner," he explained, already pulling a suitcase from the top of the closet, still avoiding my gaze. "It's a huge opportunity for the firm." He was frustratingly, suspiciously vague on the details. He packed in a rush, gave me a hurried kiss, and was gone. That weekend, the house felt too quiet. The unease that had been simmering for months boiled over into annoying suspicion I could no longer ignore. I wasn't proud of it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I opened my laptop and descended into a social media rabbit hole. I found Eleanor's profile, private of course, but I found one of her friends, a woman who seemed to live her entire life online, who had a public profile. I scrolled through her feed, my heart pounding. And then I saw it. She had posted an Instagram story, a video of clinking wine glasses with a geotag for a wine and jazz festival in Napa. The exact same small town Mark and Eleanor were supposedly visiting for their deal. I played the blurry video again and again, my finger hovering over the pause button. And there, in the background, out of focus but clear as day, were my husband and his boss. They weren't in a boardroom. They weren't poring over contracts. They were standing close together, laughing, and he was holding her hand. Seeing that photo wasn't like having my heart broken. It was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked all the air from my lungs. I sat there, staring at the pixelated image of my husband holding another woman's hand, and the entire world seemed to warp and tilt. But as the initial searing wave of betrayal washed over me, something else rose in its place. Cold, hard logic. My mind, the same mind I had always used to support him, to organize our life, to manage our finances so he could chase his dreams, went into overdrive. It started connecting dots with terrifying speed. The handbag, the sudden uncharacteristic defensiveness, the secret trip disguised as work. This wasn't just a simple, sordid affair. My gut, an instinct I had learned to trust, was screaming at me that this was deeper, uglier. That night he called, his voice bright and breezy, telling me the deal was going great and he'd be home late Sunday. I played the part of the loving wife, my voice smooth and calm while my insides churned. The next night he was out for another late one at the office. The lie was so blatant now it was almost insulting. While he was gone, I sat down at his laptop. For our entire relationship, we'd shared passwords. It was a symbol of our trust, our partnership. A trust he had systematically dismantled. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened his browser. I went straight to our shared online bank records. I scrolled back, looking for the charge for that handbag, but it wasn't there. He hadn't bought it with our money. But I did find something else. Small, regular transfers from our joint checking account into his personal savings account. Expense reimbursements, he'd called them. They were adding up. Then I went deeper, into his computer's hard drive. It was mostly work files and photos of us, smiling in a life that now felt like a complete fiction. But then I saw it. A single, innocuously labeled folder, personal projects. It was password protected. My blood ran cold. On a hunch, a sick, twisted little guess, I typed in a password, ELEANOR. Access granted. The folder opened. Inside wasn't a collection of saved sexts or romantic emails. It was worse. It was spreadsheets, dozens of them with cryptic names like Project V and Q3 Logistics. And alongside them, copies of bank statements from an account I had never seen before, an account held by a shell corporation with a generic, meaningless name. My breath hitched. I clicked open the first spreadsheet. It was a ledger. On one side, I saw large, round-numbered transfers from accounts I recognized as belonging to his firm, hundreds of thousands of dollars. On the other side, I saw a series of smaller, carefully disguised payments going out from that shell corporation. Payments labeled consulting fee or expense payout that went directly into Mark's secret personal savings account. Payments that matched to the dollar the cost of the handbag, the down payment on his new car, the price of 2 first-class tickets to Napa. They weren't just cheating on me. They were stealing, embezzling, and using me, my steady job, our stable home life as the perfect cover. Eleanor wasn't just his boss and his lover. She was his mentor in crime. They were a team, all right. A criminal conspiracy. And I, the supportive, trusting wife, was the one funding their startup costs while they laughed behind my back. That was the turning point. The discovery of their shared corruption instantly cauterized the wound of my heartbreak. The grief, the hurt, the sadness, it all evaporated, replaced by an ice-cold, diamond-hard rage so pure it felt like a superpower. This was no longer a domestic drama about infidelity. This was calculated. This was criminal. And I, the woman they had so profoundly underestimated, was sitting on a mountain of evidence that could utterly destroy them. With startling clarity, I realized that I held all the cards. I wasn't going to cry and pack a bag. I wasn't going to have a screaming match in the living room. I was going to burn their entire rotten enterprise to the ground. For the next 48 hours, I barely slept. Grief was a luxury I couldn't afford. I became a forensic accountant, fueled by black coffee and a righteous fury that made my mind sharper than it had ever been. I was a machine. I meticulously copied every file, every spreadsheet, every incriminating email and bank statement onto a single, encrypted USB drive. I organized it all into a perfect, damning dossier. I even wrote a cover sheet, a summary document clearly and concisely explaining the timeline of the fraud, with hyperlinks to the corresponding evidence. It was professional. It was irrefutable. It was a weapon. I planned my revenge like a corporate takeover. On Monday morning, I woke up before Mark. While he was in the shower, humming to himself as he got ready to go to the job where he was actively stealing money with his lover, I executed my plan with cold, calm precision. First, I went to the firm's corporate website. I found the names and email addresses of the other 3 senior partners on the board of directors. I drafted a crisp, professional email with the subject line, urgent and confidential, internal financial irregularities concerning partner Eleanor Vance and associate Mark Collier. I attached my password-protected dossier. Second, I did a quick search and found Eleanor's husband's work email. He was a partner at a big law firm. The subject line for him was more personal, something you should know about your wife's business trips. Same attachment. Finally, I composed an email to Mark's kind, loving parents who adored me and treated me like a daughter. That one was the hardest to write. "I am so sorry to have to be the one to tell you this," it began. Same attachment. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, just as the workday was officially beginning, I hit send on all 3 emails. I had pre-scheduled a second wave of emails to go out an hour later containing only the password. This would give them just enough time to read my subject lines and wonder, in a state of pure panic, what horrors the files contained. I finished packing my suitcase, my hands perfectly steady. When Mark came out of the bathroom, freshly scrubbed, smiling, ready for his day of crime, I was standing by the front door with my roller bag. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't say a word about the affair. I simply slid my wedding ring off my finger and placed it on the kitchen counter next to his car keys. "You should check your email," I said, my voice even and calm. "And probably your parents' email, and Alina's husband's email." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Oh, and I imagine you'll be hearing from the board of directors sometime today, too. Have a productive day at the office." And with that, I turned, opened the door, and walked out of his life without looking back, leaving nothing behind but the quiet ticking of a time bomb that was about to detonate. The fallout was, I later heard from mutual friends, swift and spectacular. Mark and Alina were fired by noon that day, escorted out of the building with their belongings in cardboard boxes. The firm launched a full-scale legal assault, suing them for every penny they had stolen, and then some, hitting them with civil charges that would financially cripple them for life. Alina's devastated husband filed for divorce within the week, using my dossier as Exhibit A in the proceedings to ensure she got nothing. Mark's family was horrified and disowned him, refusing to even speak to him. He was left utterly alone, with no job, no money, no wife, no family, and a looming criminal investigation. I used the clear, irrefutable evidence of his financial infidelity to secure a quick and decisive divorce, ensuring that my assets, the ones I had actually worked for, were protected. I took my half, I took my freedom, and I started over, leaving nothing behind but the smoking crater where his perfect life used to be. Hell hath no fury like a woman who knows her way around a spreadsheet. Okay, that wasn't just revenge. That was a tactical strike executed with the ice-cold precision of a special forces raid. She didn't just get mad, she got organized. This is what happens when you betray someone who is not only emotionally invested, but is also smarter and more meticulous than you are. He thought she was just the supportive wife holding down the fort. He had no idea she was capable of becoming a one-woman wrecking crew. The best part is how she used their own professional world against them. She didn't slash his tires, she created a corporate dossier. She didn't scream at him, she emailed the board of directors. She used the language of power, spreadsheets, evidence, legal liability, to dismantle his entire life. She didn't just leave him, she liquidated him. That is a masterclass in not getting even, but getting way, way ahead. Our final story for today is called Unprofessional Conduct, and the tagline is a thing of beauty. She told me my hair was unprofessional, so I decided to show her what a truly professional takedown looked like. Oh, I love this already. There is nothing more satisfying than someone using the system to beat a bully at their own game. This sounds like some righteous, by-the-book revenge. Getting the junior marketing associate job at that firm felt like the opening scene of my real life. I was 23, buzzing with ideas from my recent college classes, and so hungry to prove myself that I practically vibrated with ambition. The office itself was exactly what I'd pictured: a modern, open-plan space with glass walls, sleek furniture, and a high-end espresso machine that hissed and steamed like a small dragon. My colleagues were bright, funny, and collaborative. The work was challenging and exciting. For the first few weeks, I was living on a cloud of pure, unadulterated hope. My direct manager was a woman named Susan. She was older, probably in her late 50s, a holdover from a different, more rigid corporate era. She was the kind of woman who wore sensible pumps, tailored skirt suits in shades of gray and navy, and spoke in a clipped, efficient tone that left no room for ambiguity. At first, she seemed perfectly nice, if a little distant. She gave clear instructions, offered curt but not unkind feedback, and generally left me to my own devices. But as I started to settle in, a subtle, uncomfortable tension began to build between us. A tension that always, inexplicably, seemed to be centered on my appearance, specifically my hair. The first incident happened about a month in. I came to work one Monday feeling particularly fly. Over the weekend, I had spent hours getting my hair done in a crown of neat, elegant box braids that cascaded down my back. I felt beautiful, powerful, and professional. I was sitting at my desk, deep in a project brief, when Susan's shadow fell over me. She stopped by my desk, a coffee mug in her hand, her eyes immediately fixing on my head. "Oh," she said, and a tight, weird smile played on her lips. "Your hair is different today." She tilted her head, studying me like I was a strange piece of modern art she couldn't quite decipher. "It's very ethnic." The word hung in the air between us, charged and ugly. "Are you planning on keeping it like that for the big client meeting on Friday?" I was so stunned I could only stammer out a noncommittal. I hadn't thought about it." My mind was racing. Ethnic. Did she really just say that? I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, chalking it up to a clumsy, generational ignorance rather than outright malice. But the comment sat like a cold stone in the pit of my stomach for the rest of the day, making me feel self-conscious and watched. A few weeks later, after I'd taken the braids out, I wore my natural hair to work in a beautifully styled, soft afro. I loved it. It was healthy, it was full, it was me. I had spent time and care making it look its best. That afternoon, I got an instant message from Susan. "Pop by my office when you have a sec. Want to have a private chat." My stomach immediately did a nervous flip. The phrase "private chat" is corporate code for something is wrong. I walked to her office, my heart thumping a little faster than usual. She gestured for me to come in and then, ominously, closed the door. The quiet click of the latch immediately set my nerves on edge. She sat behind her large, imposing desk and folded her hands, adopting the gentle, patronizing tone of a concerned mentor about to dispense some unwelcome advice. "I'm only telling you this because I want to see you succeed here," she began, the classic preamble to an insult. "You're bright and your work is promising, but your hair," she paused, letting the word hang there. "When it's so poofy, it can be perceived by some of our more conservative clients as a bit wild, a little unkempt." She leaned forward, her expression one of deep sincerity. "It's just not a professional look, you understand. It doesn't project the kind of polished image we want to present." She picked up a pen from her desk. "Maybe you should consider some products to tame it, or even think about getting it chemically straightened. It would just look so much sleeker, more controlled." I left her office feeling shaken, humiliated, and incandescent with a rage I had to swallow down until it felt like a lump of hot coals in my throat. This wasn't helpful advice. This was a demand for assimilation, wrapped in the disingenuous language of professional concern. She was telling me that my natural self was unprofessional, that to succeed, I had to contort myself into her narrow, Eurocentric ideal of what a professional woman should look like. I decided then and there that I wouldn't be bullied. My hair is a part of my identity, and I wasn't going to erase myself to make her comfortable. I continued to style my hair however I chose, in twists, in puffs, in intricate braided updos, always making sure it was neat, clean, and well cared for. I was determined to prove her wrong with the undeniable quality of my work. But Susan didn't see my pride. She saw it as defiance, and she was just waiting for her chance to punish me for it. The final straw, the tipping point that turned my simmering anger into cold, hard resolve, came during my first quarterly review. I went into the meeting feeling confident. My performance metrics were excellent. I had successfully managed 2 small campaigns, and I had received glowing peer reviews from my colleagues, which Susan was required to read to me. She went through them in her usual clipped monotone. "Plays well with others. Creative. A great asset to the team." Then she put the papers down. She cleared her throat and pointed to the final section on the official company form. "Now, under professionalism and appearance, I do have one note I need to make," she said, her pen tapping the paper. My blood ran cold. "I have to document," she said, her eyes meeting mine with a look of cold triumph, "that you have been resistant to feedback regarding the maintenance of a corporate's appropriate look. Your hairstyle is, at times, distracting and can read as unprofessional to senior leadership and clients." She had done it. She had formally, officially reprimanded me in writing on my permanent record for my hair, my natural black hair. I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time after that meeting, holding the review in my trembling hands. The official company letterhead, her neat signature, the hateful words. The trembling started in my hands and spread through my whole body, but as the minutes ticked by, the trembling stopped. The hurt and the shock receded, replaced by a cold, crystalline resolve that settled deep in my bones. Susan hadn't just insulted me, she had discriminated against me. She had created a hostile work environment and was now using her institutional power to actively sabotage my career based on her own racist beauty standards. This wasn't about my hair anymore. It was about my rights. I wasn't going to quit. I wasn't going to file a complaint and hope for the best. I was going to fight back. And I was going to do it by the book, using the very professionalism she claimed I lacked as my greatest weapon. My revenge was a masterclass in professional conduct. That evening, I went home, opened a new document on my laptop and began to build my case. I became a lawyer and my own first client. I documented everything. I wrote down the exact date, time, and location of Susan's first comment about my braids being ethnic. I transcribed her well-intentioned advice from our private chat verbatim, recalling with perfect, rage-fueled clarity her words about my hair being poofy and wild. I detailed the quarterly review, quoting her official, written comments directly from the paper I now had sealed in a plastic sleeve. For each entry, I added a short, professional paragraph explaining how the incident made me feel, singled out, humiliated, stressed, and afraid for my job security. I was building a narrative of targeted harassment. Next, I discreetly approached two colleagues I trusted. One of them was also a woman of color, and I knew from quiet chats over coffee that she had her own uncomfortable stories about Susan. I explained my situation calmly and asked if they'd be willing to provide confidential statements to HR about the environment Susan fostered if it came to that. They both agreed immediately, their eyes filled with a weary understanding. One of them even forwarded me an old email chain where Susan had made an inappropriate comment about her loud headscarf just before a presentation. It was the smoking gun. With my meticulously detailed, multi-page dossier complete and my witnesses confirmed, I scheduled a meeting with the head of human resources, a no-nonsense woman named Brenda. I walked into her office the next day not as a hysterical, emotional victim, but as a calm, prepared, and deeply wronged professional. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply placed the printed document, neatly bound in a report cover, on her desk. "Brenda," I said, my voice even and steady, "I have a serious issue I need to report regarding a pattern of discriminatory behavior from my manager, which I believe constitutes a hostile work environment under the company's own policies." I walked her through the timeline, using the very corporate jargon the company prided itself on. I presented a clear, undeniable pattern of targeted harassment, backed by dates, direct quotes, and now, physical evidence. I explained the psychological toll it had taken, framing it in terms of productivity and workplace safety. The head of HR read through my document, her expression shifting from professional concern to utter horror. When she got to the part about the ethnic comment, her jaw tightened. When she read the witness statement with the email about the headscarf, she quietly said, "Oh, Susan." An immediate, high-priority investigation was launched. Susan was blindsided, placed on administrative leave pending the results. My brave colleagues gave their statements, which corroborated my story perfectly. The old email was the nail in her coffin. The investigation, once started, uncovered that this was a long-standing pattern. HR found exit interview notes from two other former employees of color who had cited similar, previously undocumented experiences with Susan as their reason for leaving. Within 2 weeks, Susan was terminated for gross misconduct and multiple violations of the company's anti-harassment and anti-discrimination policies. The firm, clearly terrified of a lawsuit, issued a formal written apology to me, expunged the unjust review from my permanent record, and most importantly, rolled out mandatory, company-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion training for all management staff, led by an outside consultant. I had not only won justice for myself, but I had forced a systemic change that would protect everyone else. 6 months later, I was promoted to Senior Marketing Associate, a position I earned based on the quality of my work, not the texture of my hair. True professionalism isn't about conforming to an outdated, exclusionary image. It's about treating every single person with dignity and respect. And that is how you do it. That right there is the definition of a professional takedown. She didn't sink to her manager's level. She rose above it and then used the weight of the entire corporate structure to bring her down. What I love most is the sheer intelligence of her approach. She didn't just get emotional, she got methodical. She built a case file like a prosecutor. She gathered evidence, she secured witnesses, and she presented an irrefutable argument to the one department that had the power to do something about it. She turned Susan's accusation of being unprofessional on its head, demonstrating that true professionalism is about competence, documentation, and holding people accountable to the rules they claim to uphold. She didn't just save her job, she made the entire company a better place to work. That's not revenge, that's leadership. And that's all we have for today, folks. Thank you so much for hanging out and listening to these wild rides. From family secrets to corporate takedowns, it's clear you should never underestimate a person who's been pushed too far. Now I have to ask you, what's the most satisfying moment of karma you've ever witnessed in your own life? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you like these stories and want more content just like this, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It's the best way to support the channel. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you at the next tipping point.